Hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in again. My name is Robert Walgamot. I'm a 16-year real estate professional, and today I want to answer the question for you, or at least attempt to answer the question, is Utah in a real estate bubble? Well, I'll give you my opinion. So first, I want to make it very clear. This is just my opinion. This is not necessarily the opinion of Realty Path, and this should not be considered financial advice or investment advice. This is just simply my opinion. And also, sorry about my voice. I've got a little bit of a cold I'm fighting, but I'm getting over it. Okay, now that I have that out of the way, let's get to it. Is Utah in a real estate bubble? First, I want to point out that this is a very valid question. And it's probably the question I get asked most often when it comes to, my real estate. And to be fair, it's not even recently the most question I get asked. It's been the most commonly asked question for years now. As I said earlier, I've been a real estate agent for 16 years. So I was in the trenches fighting during the Great Recession of 07, 08 into 09. I was right there in the thick of things. And so, yeah, I do have a few things to say. All right, I think the best way to answer this question is to start by looking at the reasons people are starting to throw around the B word in the first place, okay? Utah has seen a dramatic increase in home values over the last few years, especially during the COVID era. Honestly, it was quite the sight to behold. It was amazing how quickly prices shot up, where in a lot of markets, they softened. So for reasons I don't necessarily want to get into for this video, the Corona era really supercharged Utah's already hot market. Utah's annual housing appreciation rate from 2020 to 2021 was a record 19.2%. Now that is very, very high. In fact, our appreciation rate was so high, it made us number 2 in the nation, only next to Idaho, which had a 23.7% appreciation rate. And so far, in 2021, right now I'm recording this, it's in September, the market has already appreciated roughly another 19%. So we may go ahead and break that record yet again. All right, so another concern I hear people talking about is what we call the housing price to income ratio. What this ratio is looking at is the average home price versus the average household income. As a reference, the national average is 4.4. For example, let's say you have a household income of $100,000 per year, okay? The national average says that most likely that means you're going to be living in a home that's worth 4.4 times that amount. In other words, about $440,000. Now, the national average is a ratio of 4.4, but here in Utah, it is higher than that. Our ratio, depending on if you use the median or the average, and based on the most recent data I could find, is anywhere from 6.1 to 7.9. Now, this ratio is different depending on where you live in the state. So, in Salt Lake, for example, the ratio is about 9.2. In Ogden, you're looking at about 9.5, and in a place like St. George, you're looking at something closer to 11.1. Now, of course, on top of all these facts are the anecdotal stories that we hear, right? So, you've all heard them. Buyers saying that they've made 30 offers, all of them significantly over the asking price. They're willing to do whatever it takes, and they'll even give you their kidneys. Just please accept our offer. And then they just get sick and tired of everything. They throw in the towel and just call it a day. That story is far too common, or at least it was. Now, on the seller side, I'm sure you've heard those stories as well, right? A seller lists their home at what they think is a dream price. And then suddenly, the very first day on market, they get 20 offers and end up selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars over their asking price. And they maybe get some kidneys out of the deal too. Now, of course, all of this is also taking place against the backdrop of what this generation experienced back in 07, 08, 09 in the form of the Great Recession. I think all of us that went through that, myself included, were left pretty traumatized by that event. So at this point, I definitely wouldn't blame you for thinking, all right, we're definitely in a bubble, right? Right, Robert? We're in a bubble. All right. Not to get too cheesy on you here, but I do think it's worth taking a quick look at the term bubble and what that means. Okay, so the term bubble, by definition, means a good or fortunate situation that is removed from reality and is probably not likely to last. That's what people mean when they're saying a bubble. But there's something you need to understand. Bubbles exist in markets all the time, whether that be the stock market, the currency market, other commodities. Bubbles come and go. By the way, there are such things as negative bubbles as well. Now, most of the time, we don't hear about these bubbles because they kind of self-regulate. They kind of inflate, deflate on their own, and a bubble bursting, so to say, isn't a very common event. Now, I think what people are really saying when they're asking me, is Utah in a real estate bubble, is they're asking the question, not just are we in a bubble, but more specifically, is that bubble going to burst? And if so, when is it going to burst? Now, I want to get straight to my point. Is Utah in a real estate bubble? The simple answer is yes. Now, hold on. Don't go anywhere. You're going to want to hear the rest of this because the answer is yes, sort of. Now, bear with me. Because the next part of that question is, if we are in a bubble, is that bubble going to burst? Now, the answer to this is the important one. In all honesty, I don't see how it can. Now, the caveat here, there can always be events that can move the markets up and down, things that are unforeseen. I mean, we live in the COVID era. That's the textbook example of something nobody really saw coming and has made a drastic change to our lives. But I am willing to say that barring some massive event, a meteor strike, alien invasion, World War III, anything like that, I'm willing to give you my opinion on what I'm pretty sure is going to happen in this market. But first, you need to understand that if you're trying to compare this current real estate market to the market that led up to the crash back in 2007, it's really hard to compare the two. There are some major differences that need to be considered. But for time's sake, I want to go over my number one biggest difference. And this big difference is that real estate market buildup, that appreciation, that skyrocketing appreciation in prices that happened before the Great Recession and really led to the Great Recession was all due to a lack of regulations in the lending industry. Lenders back then were insanely lax. I can tell you from personal experience, it was insane. You could literally walk into a lender's office and say, hey, I make $200,000 a year. Sign a paper stating that that's the case and walk out of there with a loan. It was pretty much that easy. On top of that, people were getting loans for more than 100% of the contract price. So for example, if you're trying to buy a $200,000 home, you could say, hey, Mr. Lender, I want to borrow $220,000 against that home and use that extra $20 to fix it up if I feel like it. And they'd say, sure, here you go. In these scenarios, people were walking into homes on day one upside down on their equity. And that's not to mention that the rates back then were way higher than they are today. And a lot of them were variable rates. Now, if you don't know what that is, look it up. They're bad. So basically, these loans were really bad news. Now, in hindsight, we could see that those loans were going to go bad. And of course, when they did, it caused an economic downturn of epic proportions. And when this worldwide Great Recession did take place, it was primarily due to the real estate market and the collapse of that market. And it, of course, affected all of the different markets across the world. The stock market, the commodities, currencies, everything. Today, however, things are different. As anyone who's tried to get a loan recently can attest to, lenders are strict. They're much, much more conservative than they used to be. They will vet you up one side and down the other to make sure you have the ability to pay back that loan. Basically, the lending industry is a very different animal these days, and it's on very, very stable ground. So at this point, you're probably saying, well, house prices are still skyrocketed, so what's to stop them from coming down for some other reason, right? So to get into my answers for this question, I first need you to understand that I am talking specifically here in this video about Utah's real estate market. And if there is one thing you're going to take away from this video today, it should be this. Know that Utah's real estate market is extremely unique in the United States. It really does stand alone and stand apart from pretty much any other market. So please don't make the mistake of applying national rules, things you hear on the national news as speaking in national terms, and apply those things to Utah, because most of the time it's just not going to fit. So what makes Utah unique? Well, here are a few points to mull over. During the COVID era, Utah had the fastest growing GDP in the entire nation. So where others were shrinking, we continued to stay healthy and continued to grow. Utah also currently has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. And in fact, Utah is even experiencing a labor shortage right this minute. Now what that means typically is more people are going to move in from out of state and wages go higher. And now this is the big one in my opinion. We have the fastest growing population in the nation. Now listen up, this is interesting. Utah's organic growth rate is 2.5. All right, so what that means is for every person that dies, 2.5 people are born every year. That is an extremely high organic growth rate. In fact, second place is Texas at 1.7. So this high birth to death ratio is of course caused by our high birth rate for obvious reasons in this state, but it's also caused by Utah having a median age of just 31. By the way, the national average is 38. But this growth is nothing new for Utah. Over the past decade, Utah has increased its population by 18.4%, and that is the highest in the nation over that time span. And that trend, according to every expert forecast I've seen, is set to continue. Now, I believe it's also worth looking at some of those scary numbers I told you up front from a more relative standpoint. For example, the highest home price to income ratio, now remember what that is, right? That I've seen in Utah is St. George at 11.1. But let's look at California. Many metro areas there are over 17. Same with the East Coast. They're super high in that same range. Now that is absolutely crazy. And speaking of California, did you know that the average home price there right now is somewhere between $800,000 and $900,000? You thought it was bad here. $800,000 to $900,000. Now I was speaking with a realtor friend of mine out of California recently, and he told me that he has to tell buyers, listen, if you're not qualified for at least $700,000 right now, there's really just nothing out there for you. That's crazy. Now in comparison, Utah's average home price right now is about $560,000, according to the most recent numbers I could find. And if you can get yourself into the $350,000 plus range, we can get you into a place you can start that ownership game. So now you're probably thinking, well, Robert, that's all good and fine, but you can't compare Utah to California and these East Coast cities because they're premium places to live. Well, I have news for you. Look this up. Don't take my word for it. But Utah is becoming one of those premium places to live. It's happening right now. Anyway, knowing all that puts it a little more into perspective, doesn't it? I think it does. But the number one factor that leads me to believe that we aren't likely to see a bubble bursting anytime in the near future is that right now there are so many buyers ready to buy houses and wanting to buy houses, but they simply can't because our inventory isn't high enough. Now, I'll spare you the details of how we calculate housing inventory, but suffice it to say, okay, right now we're sitting on about 4 weeks of housing inventory in the state of Utah. Now, a healthy amount is considered to be 6 months. So there's still not enough homes for us to buy. So coming full circle here, are we in a bubble? The market is no doubt cooling. Now hold on. What I mean by that is, since March of this year, where we had our peak craziness, more and more homes have been listed on the market every day. And it's not a massive difference, but it's enough that the market is starting to cool a little. Now keep in mind, that doesn't mean it's going to get cold. What it means is we're going from a white hot dysfunctional market to a red hot functional market, which I hope is really, really good news for you. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I really appreciate you. Have a great day.